Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News with Chewy and Raf Manji. Raf, thank you for joining us today.
You're most welcome. Good evening to everyone.
I don't think you got the message about being bearded and capped. That's sort of a part.
I have got my my Crusaders beanie.
Oh, I don't know. You can't wear that, actually. No, I don't think we can accept that one.
Now we're enraged because the sports team.
Okay, I see.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate you having you on board. People who obviously are aware and people are flooding into the chat already as we're speaking. Raf Manji is the leader of the Opportunities Party. Do you ever get called that, or is it always just top? I mean, you know,
a bit of both, to be honest. And top obviously is easier for people. We often get called the top party, which is the Opportunities Party. So
yeah, that was like before ASB changed their full name to ASB. It was ASB. People say ASB Bank, Auckland Savings Bank, or a PIN number, personal identification number.
Yes, I guess did ACT ever get called the whatever Association of Consumers and Taxpayers? Was that it?
They get called some things. I don't know if it's ever that. Would that be fair, Chewy?
I actually never knew that acronym actually stood for anything. So, well, there we go.
Hey, Choice, man, we're looking forward to tonight. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate you jumping on board. And we are very keen to get people involved if they want to join in and chat. Being very blunt with you, super chats get priority, but no guarantee. Other than that, anyone that wants to ask a question or make a comment, you're welcome to throw it in the chat, and we'll throw it at Raf and we'll contribute to it, and we'll try and get to it. But there's going to be, you are aware, people, there's going to be too many comments for us to get to and too many questions for us to get to. So we will get to some, but not all. Is that fair, Chewy? Chewy's sort of the chat master here.
Yes, I believe that is scrupulously fair.
All right. Whilst people are rolling in, Raf, we had a bit of snow in Dunedin yesterday, and I read some headlines today that there was snow in Christchurch today. Did you see anything?
There was a little bit of sleet in the city this morning, but there was some snow up on the hills, the Port Hills. So some of the Port Hills roads were shut this morning, up Dyers Pass, places like that, but nothing down in the city. But, you know, we're not far off a decent dump if we get another big southerly storm. But, yeah, it was chilly. It was very cold today.
Yeah, I think tonight here in Dunedin it's supposed to be colder still, isn't it, Chewy? I read yesterday, at least, that tonight's overnight low is supposed to be -2 or something. I don't know if that's been updated, but that's what it was.
All I know is that I've been cheated out of my snow. It snowed a little bit. I got all excited. I went to bed. I thought I'm going to wake up to a beautiful white carpet everywhere. Lovely. And then apparently it rained about 3 o'clock and it just froze.
And then we get all the pictures of cars in Dunedin sliding down the streets and stuff.
Oh, like that. Absolutely. There were about 7 crashes on Stewart Street this morning. So
Same old.
All right. Now, Raf, we've got a shit ton to get through. We want to talk to you about all sorts of things, but I thought where we'd start tonight is actually, we want to talk to you about TOP. We want to talk to you about who TOP are. You and I have already had an hour-long conversation in this cycle. I want to talk to you about what we talked about and see where TOP is at. I was very, very honest and clear with you about my reservations for voting for TOP, and it actually wasn't about policy or anything like that. We'll rehash that because I want to see if there's been any changes. And then we'll get to people's questions and comments. And, you know, we normally try and do an hour-long show that normally lasts about between 3 and 4 hours. So we'll see how we'll go tonight, actually.
Okay. We'll see how long it can last.
Let's start with a conversation around tax. We want to talk about top tax. Hey, that's quite. Have you used that acronym? Top tax.
It looks like a hamburger to me.
The top tax. Yeah, this is a story off News Hub tonight, and it's relevant because it talks about capital gains tax and it talks about wealth tax. I want to play the story first, and then all of us will get a chance to respond to it. And I want to get your thoughts, Raf, along with obviously Top's position on these ideas. So I'm only playing half the story. This is about to go into a part where one of the Labour ministers admitted at a meeting, it looks like it must have been stuff.co.nz, because I think Tova O'Brien is the MC, maybe she was hosting another a gathering, that there's not enough tax take at the moment. And of course that flowed into a conversation for National saying, see Labour, they're all broken and stuff. But the main part about this bit I'm going to play for you is about capital gains tax and wealth tax and what the country want versus what Labour is suggesting. So here's a bit of the story.
The government would like more cash too, according to a senior minister.
We probably don't have enough tax in this country.
Do you see his comments as sort of a misstep or even as an act of rebellion?
No, I think his comments are being taken out of context.
O'Connor's tax take was in reference to paying for roads and rebuilds, but he said the Greens, whose major policy pitch is a wealth tax, have some good ideas.
The Greens are like the canary in the coal mine. Most of the issues that they raise are really, really important and real. It's just that we don't want them running the coal mine.
Just underscores again, I think, is the division that sits within that cabinet around taxation policy. We know within the Labour Party there is huge desire for a wealth tax.
I've been very clear that we won't be implementing a wealth tax.
A captain's call from the saucy roll snuffling Labour leader.
The problem is it's quite flaky, which means I'm going to end up sending flakes everywhere.
Which voters actually think was a pretty flaky decision. In our latest News Hub Breed research poll, we asked, should Chris Hipkins have ruled out a wealth tax? There were more who said no, 47%, than those who thought Hipkins had made the right call, just 39%.
That's all we need. That's all we need, because then they go into some more commentary from News Hub. So basically, 4 in 10 people think that they should have ruled out a wealth tax. They don't ask the question about capital gains tax. But what do you, because we here, I think I can speak for Chewy, we here, because we come from the world sort of in the same sort of political space, we think two things. We think a wealth tax and a capital gain tax would be a good idea, but also it seems politically smart because it's popular. And that's another poll that says more people want it than don't. So we're a bit confused as to what polling Labour's using to rule it out so ardently when they're trying to set themselves apart from National. So that's sort of where we've been. It seems to be politically naive, and it seems to be, let's say, ideologically for the left to be weird not to want to do it. So that's where we've been talking about. Be interested to get maybe your personal takes on a wealth tax, capital gains tax, and also Top's take on that as well.
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting question, and I'll be quite objective about this, even without regard to our own policy. So, I was very surprised that Hipkins ruled out a capital gains tax, because essentially what the Greens did with the wealth tax, which I don't support for various reasons, which I'm happy to discuss, they essentially moved. If we talk about the Overton window, they moved the ground, quite far left, which is essentially we're going to take a lot of money off a small group of people. So no one will really sort of feel it apart from those group of people who actually could quite easily leave the country. But that's a different issue. So a lot of people go, oh, that sounds quite good, actually. But the mechanics and the reality of it are not as simple as it sounds. But what they did is they opened up a massive space for Labour to go, look, we don't really like this wealth tax thing because we don't want to tax the productive economy. But you know what? This housing is a problem. Everyone agrees it's a problem. We can throw stats at it all day. A nice stat I like to use is from December 2001 to 2021, wages went up 56%, according to the Labour Cost Index, and house prices went up 456%. Now, that doesn't make any sense to any normal person, okay? So people can relate to something like that. That's all Hipkins needed to say. And then he needed to say, we're going to introduce from 2024, 1st of April 2024, at those property valuations, a capital gains tax of whatever. Pick a number, 20%, 25%, whatever you want to say. And that's it. End of story. They would have got that through. And to be honest, there's always conversations about, should it include the family home? Of course it should. It should be just all property, end of story, right? Let's stop messing about here. So it doesn't touch all the gains that people have made over the last 20, 30, 40 years. But it's saying we need to make the system a bit fairer. We need to reallocate our capital settings. You'll still make money out of property, but the government will take its share. And I think, probably 70% of people probably would have supported that. Really simple, really straightforward, no messing, no carve-outs, just end of story. And so when he ruled that out, I thought, what's Labour about in any respect here, you know?
Yeah.
And I think there's just been constant disappointment that they've not done the big structural stuff. And I mean, obviously they didn't mention a land value tax, but to be honest, land value tax and capital gains tax are related a little bit, as is land value capture, which is National is promoting land value capture. They don't like to mention the land bits. They call it value capture, but it's a derivative of a land value tax. So Labour is actually completely the only party who's not promoting anything like this, apart from ACT, who, frankly, in the old days, ACT would have supported a land tax. Roger Douglas would support probably a land tax because it makes sense. So I don't really understand what Labour is doing and how they got to a position where their focus groups and their polls could have possibly told them no for capital gains tax. Capital gains tax already in the polling is over 50% positive.
Yeah.
A lot of people they poll probably don't really understand a wealth tax, but it sounds sort of like a good thing to do. So now they're going to come out on Sunday with a GST off probably, fruit and veg or fresh food or whatever. And that is going to be a pain to bring in. It's not the best tax to bring in. There are better ways of doing it. But I guess they just figure they need something that has a big zing about it. And they can say, cost of living, we're going to cut your cost of living by 15%, which is not going to be the reality.
It's not going to happen. We talked about this. People spend $20 or $30 or $40 or $50 on fruit and veg. So saving 50% on that is not going to make a big difference. Just really quickly in a nutshell, like in a sentence or two, you say there's better ways of doing it. Like what?
In terms of?
You said GST on fruit and veggies. There's better ways of doing it. Like what?
Oh yeah, you just give people more money. I mean, basically just raise benefits. Probably the best thing you could do to help people who are struggling is wipe MSD debt for starters. That's $2 billion. It's a simple zeroing on the balance sheet. You could do it with one keystroke, and then those people suddenly get a big infusion of $50, $100 a week, which is what they're paying back on the debt. Those are the people who are really, really struggling, and they are under this burden of debt, which they've taken on not to go out and have a good time, but to basically pay basic bills. And
get tires for their car, or to go to the dentist or something like that.
I would be happy. If there's one thing I could achieve being in politics, if I get into parliament, which I hope I do, is to eliminate MSD in the next 10 years so that it doesn't exist anymore, or certainly not doing the same thing it does now, because that's how you help people in terms of getting cash into their pockets. Doing it through the GST exemption and all the administrative issues that it has is going to be a pain, and it's actually going to, better off people will do better from this policy. Yeah.
Just to be clear, when you say eliminate the Ministry of Social Development, like because you don't want it to be necessary anymore, or do you have problems with it as a government department?
Yeah, I think it's dysfunctional and it's inefficient in terms of its job.
So what instead? What instead of MSD?
We'd like a universal basic income,
right?
Essentially, and then you have specific support for people who have other needs, people with disabilities, for example, obviously workforce training, et cetera, but every time I speak to someone who's dealing with the benefit system, it's just the most horrible experience you can imagine. Yeah.
With those other things though, you've got your basic universal income. I'm not sure what your dollar figure is. When they talked about it in other countries, it seems to be like $1,000 a month. That's not enough to live off. So there's got to be another department to look after those at the bottom who need more. If we're getting rid of the Ministry of Social Development, who does that? Like there needs to be another department, more bureaucracy somewhere else then to look after those, as you've just said, who might have a disability or need other money. Where do those get organised in your world?
Those would probably come out of Ministry of Health. I mean, those are generally health issues. But in terms of a universal basic income, which is, it's frankly, we're not ready for it right this second. We're aiming for 2030 to bring that in. That essentially puts the same amount of money into people's pockets in the most efficient way, which is directly. They don't have to fill out forms. They don't have to say they're looking for work. They just need to get on with their lives. And a tax system which encourages work and encourages participation so that people are not essentially disadvantaged by going out to work, which impacts so many people, particularly single parents who are trying to manage childcare, housing, and trying to look for work. And then every time they do something, they get penalized. And then they think, well, there's no point looking for work. Anyway, I mean, those are quite sort of complex issues within the tax and welfare system. But in terms of the bigger tax, in terms of a capital gains tax or GST or food, yeah, I think essentially Labour have missed probably the best opportunity they'll ever have to bring this into play.
It sounds like with some of these ideas, and I know you only, should you get there will only be a certain amount that you are going to be able to try and get through. But 2 or 3 of the things you've talked about already, like universal income or giving people more money rather than taking money off GST, may require, like cancelling debt from Ministry of Social Development, may require more income. But am I right? And Chewy probably knows more about this than I. That your tax system, what you're proposing and paying tax, people will be paying less. It sounds like, I guess what I'm trying to say, it sounds like you're talking about spending more but taking less tax. Is that a fair assertion of what TOP's about? And then if it is, how do you spend more and take in less?
Yeah, no, that's not what we're about. So essentially, last October, we proposed a tax switch. So essentially, we set the narrative around how to approach tax. And, you know, I remember bumping into David Parker in the airport, and he goes, "Oh, I like that tax switch idea." And I said, "Well, why don't you use it?" And they didn't quite get their sort of narrative right. But essentially, it's about getting the tax setting. So it's not about raising more money, particularly. It's about making sure that we're taxing in the right places and then we're spending in the right places. So we want income taxes to be cut so that people have more income in their pockets. And to pay for that, we want to tax land. That's our essential tax switch.
Okay.
It's not about raising revenue for the government. That's a different story altogether, which is what I guess Damien O'Connor was talking about in a sort of slightly ham-fisted way. This is about getting the settings right. We want to encourage work. We want to encourage people to earn and create, you know, income and wealth. And we want to tax land because land is where the real issue is. Now, you could do it with the capital gains tax. It's not quite as efficient. And there are other ideas that we could put together with the capital gains tax, which again have a little bit of complexity in explaining it. But yeah, that's essentially what we're proposing. So essentially, it's shifting the burden of tax from income to land. So if you go back to that's
a
like
switch.
Wages versus house prices. That essentially is one of the biggest problems. If you think how much money people spend of their disposable income on housing, it's a huge amount. So that relationship between income and housing costs is really critical. And yes, obviously there are other issues that people have to pay for, food being one of them, and obviously energy being another one. But essentially, housing is probably the biggest cost for most people.
So, I guess my big question here is the narrative has really been about capital gains tax, and everybody's sort of split down the middle of almost yes or no, whether it's a good idea or not. You sort of mentioned that it's not as efficient as your idea of a land tax. What are the key differences between those two?
A land tax, I mean, the key difference is that a land tax in its entirety puts an extra cost on land. Therefore, it reduces the price of land. The thing about land is you can't move it. You can't shift it. The thing about a capital gains tax is it doesn't have any particular encouragement to develop land, to use land productively. It's simply just you're paying a small amount of realized gain. So a capital gains tax is good because it essentially, some of the revenue from gains in, what is it? It's a gain in land price, not a gain in the house price particularly, because your houses are generally depreciating assets. And so capital gains tax takes a bit of that, and it takes it in a lump sum. A land value tax essentially takes a tiny portion of that and levies it every year. But what it does, people sitting on bare land, for example, are encouraged to develop that land. They're also encouraged to densify that land, so get the best value out of that land. So imagine you have, you know, a little bungalow sitting on a, you know, 800-meter section, and then you have an apartment block sitting on the 800-meter section next door. They're paying the same amount in land tax, but obviously you've got a lot more people on the other side. So obviously their overall cost is much lower. So it encourages density, which is what we want, and it encourages people to build on land that they have sitting around. So we obviously have a lot of people who land bank, and they don't pay any. I mean, it's just it's a gimme basically. So anyone who can get their hands on capital and buy residential land. I mean, Bernard Hickey goes on about this all the time. That's the biggest trade in New Zealand. Forget about getting a job, try and borrow some money, and then keep borrowing some money and keep buying land. And that's how a lot of people have got very wealthy in this country. and they've done it tax free. So that's what we need to fix. Now, capital gains tax captures some of that some of the time, but obviously it's on realized gains, so people can just sit on stuff forever and keep borrowing against it and leverage. But so in countries where they have capital gains taxes, which is in most countries, but say Australia, for example, they've used also stamp duty as well as another way of raising property taxes. Same in the UK. Australia is experimenting with land value tax as well. Essentially, everyone's trying to find the right settings to make sure that, you know, there is incentives to build more housing supply, and that the value increase in land, which is essentially based on public infrastructure and public investment. Why do people want to live in places with nice schools and nice hospitals and nice roads and whatever? And New Zealand is basically the only place that doesn't do anything. So I'm at the point where, yeah, we have this proposal, but, you know, it's like, just do something. Even if you had a capital gains tax just on investment property, which is kind of what we have with the Bright Line test, but of course it's quite easy to get around that. Just do it and make it explicit, and then at least raise some revenue, show where the revenue goes to, so not just into the Treasury coffers, but back into some kind of housing or income relief. And I don't know, we're sort of stuck. We're a bit stuck here, I think.
Can I check in on something first of all? Because I think I heard you say something, but I may have heard it incorrectly. I just wanted you to see if I heard it correctly. When you're talking about the land value tax, 0.75%, I'm looking at your website right now, you said it's an extra cost on land that reduces the cost of land. I missed something, or is that correct? Because if that's correct, how does an extra cost make it cheaper? I'm just trying to work that out.
Because basically, if you have an asset of any sort and you have to pay a tax on it, the value of that asset over time will go down because you have an extra cost burden on it. So let's say it's worth $1 million 1 year, and you've got to pay $7,500 of tax on it, and someone comes to buy it off you, they're going to take off that $7,500 tax.
But also land will incrementally increase in price, like property does.
So the fact is,
if I've got hang on, if I've got $1 million worth of land, and I keep it for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and I don't build my house, and then I sell it, I'm going to sell it for $1.3 million. That's what I was trying to figure out. So that's going to be more expensive. I'm just trying to see how it makes it less expensive. So for the owner today, it doesn't make it less expensive. You're saying it takes some of the value out of it on paper, although you are paying it. So it's not necessarily cheaper for someone. It doesn't make it cheaper for someone to buy. It basically reduces the value of it if you're paying tax on it, because that capital is coming out of it on paper.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't mean land prices won't go up, because land prices are also determined by other things, such as land supply. But essentially, it adds an extra carrying cost to the land. So if you're just sitting there land banking and you think, I'm going to wait 30 years to build on this, yes, you're hoping obviously that prices will go up by more than the 0.75% here. That's why actually land value tax is not actually as big a deal as people think. It's not a huge amount. It's equivalent to 20 years of capital gains if you were paying, let's say, a 30% capital gains tax. So that's why it has some relation to capital gains. Now, of course, these things are not linear, but over time, land prices have always gone up in countries where, generally you have stable systems, because you can't really make any land that's new. You can certainly rezone land so that you can build on it, and that takes pressure, and we do need to do that. And of course, one of the big challenges we've got, and that we've had for a long time, is the rezoning of land to build on. And of course, that's one issue. Then of course, you've got to get the houses onto the land. So you can rezone a lot of land, but if people don't build on it, you don't have any housing. So there's a lot of issues and there's a lot of complexity, but tax is one side and basic land supply is another, and the supply of housing is another. And that's why, something like Kiwi Build got into real trouble, is because they just didn't really understand how to deliver actual houses out of the ground.
I think for the longest time, when it comes to housing, it's that Kiwi quarter acre paradise, right? Just a massively inefficient use of the land, and then we get urban sprawl and all of that sort of thing. So I could definitely see the benefit of encouraging people to intensify the land that they own to get the best return. I also like the idea of, as you said, spreading out what would be a lump sum capital gains tax if you sold your house, because wouldn't you sell your house, you get a price, and then the government goes, come on, give me a big chunk of it, is not a good not a good feeling.
I would actually say, I mean, to be fair, there are challenges with it because, like rates, like your property rates you pay to the council, people have to find the cash for this. The thing about capital gains that are coming out of realized sales is you have the cash. So let's say you bought a house for, I don't know, 500,000, and 10 years later you sell it for $1 million, you made $500,000. And if the government says, right, we'll take, 25% of that, you pay them the 125 grand, but you've got the cash to do that. But yeah, of course, it sounds like a lot of money, but if you annualize it over 10 years, actually it's 12.5 grand a year. And then if you relate that to a land value tax that we're proposing, it's slightly less. So, these things, they're all in the same ballpark. And I think the problem that we've had with this conversation is that the Greens came out with this whole big wealth tax, and suddenly everyone's going, what the hell? So you're taxing my stocks, my bonds, my car, art, whatever. It becomes a much more complex conversation because you're taxing people's businesses and assets, and then you want to tax people's trusts. But that's why I kind of thought that the Greens left the door open for Labour just to come out with something quite simple. And most people have gone, yeah, you know what? That makes more sense. That makes more sense. And the fact that they didn't, and I don't know. And of course, somebody will know. They will have a poll, or they'll have a reason, but it hasn't really been explained as to why they decided not to do it, other than that National would have said, that's terrible. But actually, for most people in National probably would say, yeah, that's fair enough as well. Then we need to put this thing to bed so we can kind of move on to other issues to deal with. You know what I mean? It's like this thing's been hanging around like a bad smell for so long. And I think we need to sort it out once and for all. But we need some kind of cross-parliamentary agreement on this. And it just seems that we're stuck and we're polarized. And I think that's why everyone is so frustrated with this upcoming election, is they're kind of sick of it. There's it's like, surely we should be able to do a little bit better than this.
I also think we're going to ask you what some of the big issues we should be talking about. Like, should we really be talking about cell phones in schools? Is that one of the big issues in New Zealand that we need to sort out today, or are there other things? We may get to that shortly, but just before we get off the tax, I've got one question for you. Is on your tax-free threshold? Yeah, this is from top tax-free threshold. That you're going to give the first 15,000 tax-free, 15 to 80,000 20%, 80 to 180 35%, over 180 up to 250 42%, and remaining income over 250 at 45%. At any point in your equation, does that mean people will be paying more tax? Because in all of these examples you've given, people are paying less tax. And again, I guess I'm going to ask, with all the people who are now getting more money, that's everybody that is earning more than $15,000, is that still accounted for? And I'm scrolling down for people who are watching, in the land tax, which you say is $7 billion per annum, making our three-part plan fiscally neutral. Is that covered in the $15,000 with the tax-free? Is that why everyone can pay less?
It's a switch. So basically, there's the income side of it, and then there's the land side of it. So to know exactly your impact, you need to go to our tax calculator, which should be on that website.
But will there be people who pay more under that system? Like, if let's say they're earning $1 squillion.
We think, and it's always difficult to estimate these things, we think probably about 20-30% of people will pay more.
Okay.
And probably around 30-40% of people will not be affected too much. So there's a nice chart out there somewhere. But obviously it depends on your household income. But essentially, if your household income is around sort of 80,000 and your land value is around, I don't know, $500,000-600,000. So essentially that's almost like a $800,000-900,000 home. It'll be pretty much neutral. Okay. But of course, every household has a different makeup. So you have, some people have two incomes, whatever. But essentially that's sort of the median point. So it's really it's only people who live in very expensive houses will be paying more.
It's funny that you mentioned $80,000, because we actually did this as a little thing ourselves quite a long time ago when it was talked about. And we used the Australian numbers, which the bands were 19, 32.5, 37 and 45. So the first 14,000 would be tax-free. And so we did the current system, what people would be paying, and we did up to 300, I think we did up to about 300K, what the new one would be. And we found that there was a crossover point, and our crossover point was $80,000.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
when this is ours is hypothetical because we're not politicians, but we were basing it on the Australian system, and we found that under the current system, if you went $80,000, you paid $17,320 in tax. And under this proposed system we're making up, you, at $80,000 you'd pay $17,310. So nothing to do with land tax, just purely changing those bands and the amounts in them. But we found that our tipping point was about $80,000. So it's interesting you would say it's about $80,000.
yeah, what's interesting is when we started off on this, we didn't think, I wasn't looking at the Australian model, but obviously when I do something, I go, what are they doing in Australia? And actually we've ended up with quite a similar tax structure to Australia.
Yeah.
So when we think everyone's going to Australia because, I mean, the salaries are higher, but the tax system is also a little bit higher to us. And they have a capital gains tax, and they have stamp duties, and they have land, a whole mixture depending which state you're in. So the Aussies have got on with this. They've got a bigger economy. I mean, they've got a lot more going on. I mean, they dig a whole bunch of stuff out of the ground and sell it. We don't do a lot of that, but we obviously have a farming sector, which, you know, keeps the economy afloat mostly. So, yeah, I think tax has just been, I don't know, just been one of those conversations in New Zealand that's really hard to have. We've had 2 tax working groups. We had God knows how many local government. We have a lot of working groups, you know, so I'm thinking, when we actually know the decisions are actually quite simple and the policies themselves are actually very simple to bring in, but somehow we have, I don't know, we're stuck basically. I think that's the problem. We need to break this. We need to break the status quo somehow. And I hope that's something that we can contribute to, because actually we can talk to people across the political spectrum. They don't mind talking to us. They're happy to entertain our ideas. And actually, to be honest, people from every single party said, oh, yeah, we kind of quite like that idea, but it's not our policy.
It's funny, Chewy, that Raf says that New Zealand is stuck, because we've been talking about the right in particular seems to want to take us backwards. You know, it's all take our country back. It's all make America great again. It's all, you know, getting back on track. So it's almost like they're looking at us saying we're stuck. We need to go back. I think hopefully most New Zealanders might see we're stuck and we want to go forward. I want to bring up a tweet that Winston Peters put out today and get your thoughts around this. Winston Peters put this tweet out today. Our country, I don't know if you've seen this or not, Chewy. I'm sure you'll love this to bits. Yeah, exactly. You already seen it. Our country needs nationalism with a capital N. That means putting our country first and making locally controlled infrastructure investment a priority. Right Honourable Winston Peters. Now, to me, I put a tweet out about this that says it's straight out of Trump's playbook. Because there is that idea that first goes patriotism, then goes nationalism, and after that comes fascism. And I'm wondering your thoughts around this idea. I'd love you to respond specifically to what Winston's saying, but this idea that it feels that, I can't say everybody on the right, but the people who are putting up the slogans on the right seem to be looking back, even with their policies, rather than looking forward to get through this moment you're describing that we seem to be stuck in. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, what he says is kind of nonsense, really. He's playing to, I think, the sort of the misstep that Christopher Luxon made, talking about China and Chinese investment and Belt and Road stuff. Now, we fund infrastructure the same way we always have done. We sell bonds, and people buy those bonds, and some of those bonds are bought by local investors, and some of those bonds are bought by overseas investors. End of story. And he's trying to sort of stir up some kind of, you know, anti-Chinese sentiment. It's his traditional thing, traditional stick. We can fund infrastructure easily. That's not a problem. You know, capital is not the issue. So yeah, I mean, he's talking a lot of rubbish. But I mean, there's no doubt he's trying to tap into essentially a Trump, a kind of Brexit, a Putin, a Xi, whatever. Everyone say, right, this is all about us. Well, actually, the gains of the last 30 years, which essentially started, well, with financial deregulation in the 80s, but essentially with the Berlin Wall coming down, globalization, markets opening everywhere, and labor markets opening up everywhere, prices collapsed, not because central bankers were smart, it was the drive around technology and cheaper labor. And it was great. And it did raise a lot of people out of poverty in a lot of countries. The deindustrialization in many developed nations, such as the US and the UK, and to some extent New Zealand and Australia, had negative impacts. And some of those people got left behind, and they're still not happy about it, but particularly in the US. Now, that was the politicians could have taken care of that by, making sure those people were looked after or retrained properly. But we've seen it all around the world where those industries have basically died and not been replaced. And so those people, generally hacked off, and they tend to be the ones who kind of listen to the siren song of the Winston Peters and the Nationalist March. We're going to sort things out and the rest of it. Well, he had a chance when he was in government. Well, he put Labour into government in 2017, and he had a chance to change things. He didn't really do much apart from take his provincial growth fund and spend that money wherever. And of course, the Auditor General had a close look at some of those things. So I think that this is just politicking, whether people believe it or not. I think initially they do, but it's not where we want to go. I mean, we're interested in taking New Zealand forward, okay? And we're not interested in the left or right. And yes, that's our particular shtick. And we're looking at things like the teal card, investing in our future generations, trying to give some kind of positive hope at a time where, we are going a bit backwards. And I think, Obama always said this, progress is zig and zag. It's not a straight line. And we've had a kind of a linear-ish, notwithstanding all the financial crises of hot capital moving around the place. But essentially, since the Berlin Wall came down, we had a peace dividend around the world. China industrialized, China's economy grew. It sucked in huge amounts of imports from all around the world, which was great for New Zealand. At some point, the Chinese consumer will kick into gear, and they'll probably switch from production to consumption because they have a huge amount of savings in China, and that's something that they need to look at. But we're at a tipping point like we were in the mid-'80s. Now, you guys are probably around somewhere, maybe I don't know, school.
Oh, no, definitely not. No, I'm much too young for that, Raf. I don't know what you're talking about. 80s? My granddad was here in the 80s, not me. What are you talking about?
The structural changes that we had back in the 80s, we're going to have some structural changes now in the 20s. And they will be big changes. And I think the problem we've got, and the reason you've got sort of a let's get back on track, or let's take New Zealand back to the 80s or 50s or whenever, is the lack of vision about what the future might look like. We've tried to present some of that. We've tried to talk about the future. We don't get a lot of airtime because we don't poll high enough, and we have this threshold, which essentially is a barrier for new parties to enter Parliament. And that's obviously why we get the recycling of New Zealand First every so often. They come in, then they get kicked out. They come in, they get kicked out because we can't get new parties in. So that's a big challenge, which is why we have
5.8% in a poll today, 5% earlier in the week.
So there is a constituency there, and there always has been a constituency, and it sort of gets excited, then they get disappointed, and then they get excited, and then they get disappointed.
It's because they've all got dementia, Raf. They can't remember 6 years ago. Chewy.
Yeah. But I think we are at a tipping point. Whether the next 7 weeks is going to deliver anything new for New Zealand, I don't know. I think it's going to be pretty wild in that last sort of 4 weeks. A lot of people I talk to are fed up of the status quo. They're kind of despondent. They don't really like Labour or National. So I'm meeting so many National people with voting ACT. It's just I wouldn't be surprised if they're actually polling high. And the reason it's got nothing to do with anything policy, right? Because we all go, that policy's terrible. But I haven't met a single person who's mentioned a single policy. They just go, I don't really like Luxon. Seymour seems to know what he's talking about. And that's kind of how people are making their decisions. So it's very challenging. And because the media, on one hand, they talk about our contest of ideas, and then they just roll out this 24/7 news cycle nonsense, like whatever the day story is or whatever Luxon said that they want to pick up and turn into some drama. And that's where we're kind of stuck. And the general public is quite switched off. I mean, I'm really surprised at how little people are engaged. And I'm talking to people every day, variety of backgrounds, voting all over the place. But the main feedback I get is they're just sort of a bit hacked off. So this is what Winston will feed a little bit. But I think, we want to talk about positive stuff. We will be putting some more policy out over the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks. And we want to say, look, we're not going backwards. Going backwards is not a good idea. And going backwards is not where people in New Zealand really want to go to. Maybe some old people think, that's great. Well, their grandkids don't. And a lot of the public meetings I do, the audience often is older people and younger people. And it's this intergenerational conversation that we need to be having, because a lot of grandparents are concerned about their grandkids and the future that they're going to inherit. And they kind of go, look, we're worried about this, and we're worried about the kids not going to school. We're worried about youth crime, we're worried about educational standards, we're worried that they can't afford to buy a house, and we're worried that they're going to live overseas. That's the big issue for a lot of people. It's like my grandkids are going overseas. I might not see them again. It's like, so these are big challenges we've got, and it would be nice to see, us talking about that. And unfortunately, we're stuck in like sausage rolls and God knows what else.
And banning cell phones, Chewy?
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe banning cell. I mean, look, I'm sure teachers can work out for themselves how to deal with that, so.
I mean, one of the things that I like reading on this teal card thing is something that we don't often see, and that's policy around young people. Like we don't often see a policy that is centered on young people as, look, this is something that we need to invest in. It's always couched in there's something wrong with the education system, or there's something wrong with the justice system, or they're all running around in their hoodies and their baggy jeans doing ram raids. We don't see anything about setting up young people to be good citizens, and I think that's what jumped out at me about this. Is it's almost complete absence everywhere else.
Yeah, you're right, Trey, and you describe it really well about how do we prepare our future generations, our younger people, to be good citizens? Because if we don't get that right, we can't resist. We're not going to be able to resist what's coming at us through social media, disaggregated media, the misinformation, the nonsense, the dark side of the force. And it was actually, I have to thank Winston for this, because I was thinking about aspects of this policy.
Careful. Don't thank Winston for anything. If you thank Winston for something, he turns up in the mirror behind you. You've got to be super careful with that.
Some of it was to do with the work I'd done with the Student Volunteer Army, and some of it was around financial equity issues. And I was trying to kind of put something together that was a bit more interesting. And I must have come across some mention of the gold card, and I thought, you know what, we need a gold card for young people. Yeah, wow. And that's where the teal card came from, a gold card for young people. And I spent time looking at I downloaded the Super Gold Card app, and I had a look, and I thought, yeah, actually, this is what we need. And we spent a lot of time on it. We debated the age carefully. We looked at the cost of these things. So for us, the dental care is up to 30, and that's quite a stretch. And I spoke to a lot of dentists about supply issues. How do we deliver it? And I mean, here's a stat for you. We assume that dental care is free for, I think, up to 18, that most kids are getting good quality dental care. Well, in a lot of places in New Zealand, they're getting like 20% coverage because they don't have the staff. They don't have the dentists and the hygienists and the dental nurses. And this is in places like Northland, right? This is where we know we've got problems. So we worked out, what do we think we can afford? What do we think we can deliver? And again, the Green Party have gone full-blown free dental for everyone. Well, it's like you can't deliver it. I mean, we thought 30 was a stretch, to be honest. We wanted a round number. It's going to be hard to do that. So they've gone really big on stuff that, probably can't be delivered, but it maybe helped some of us working more in the realistic space and the center space. But I think when I talk to young people about it, I mean, to be honest, the grandparents love it. They love it. And actually I was doing a Rotary talk the other day, and some of the old guys were going, oh, I really love this civic service thing. I remember when I was in the cadet force or doing this thing or that thing, and it gave them a sense of purpose, and it gave them a sense of ability. It gave them some skills. And if you give young people that skill base, then they can go on to do other things. It's really critical, because all those kids who miss out, all those kids that don't finish school, all those kids that end up on the streets, drawn into gangs, the downstream costs are enormous. They're in the hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars when you get into imprisonment. I've worked with children of prisoners. I've seen it firsthand, and I've seen actually how cheap it is to solve the problem. When you get youth workers in there, you get social workers into the wraparound in the family, you can solve these issues. It's hard at first because it looks like it's impossible. But actually, if you put the work in, you can turn these kids around. And I think, by giving them a nice structure to say, okay, this is what's going to happen. Hey, you get a bank account at birth. We're going to put $250 a year into your bank account. It can go into a managed fund. It can go into whatever. Every kid gets it. I don't care where you're living, how poor your parents are. You get this. And then when you're 8 or 9 and you start to understand maths and money, we will have the financial literacy. There's already a company here in Christchurch, Banker, that delivers these courses in schools. And then suddenly that's where you get the financial equity. It's absolutely critical. That's where you get the gender equity around finance. That's a huge issue as well for women. So I think, yeah, I mean, so these are positive things that we're talking about that can be delivered, that don't need all the BS that we keep hearing about take our country back and whatever. We want to take our country forward.
Question number 2. No, I'm just kidding. We don't tend to interrupt Raf, because we let people answer the question. So I'm joking. It's not question number 2. It's question number 1, part Z. No, I was going to say about the Greens. You made a comment about the Greens. This is not really a question. This is more something I've learned. We did a debate between a property investor and Julianne Genter on quality affordable housing is a right, which is one of their policies. And my question to Julianne Genter was like, but what if it's quality but not affordable? Or what if it's, affordable but not, and so how do you do that? And she said very clearly a lot of their policies are sort of aspirational, that there might actually be something to get over the line in 30 years from now. I don't know if she said 30 years. And I wonder if that's the same with everyone gets free, you get dental, everybody gets free dental. It's something that they put out as a big claim now to start chipping away at it over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 cycles. Maybe, I don't know.
Look, yeah, I mean, I think the Greens have been quite odd in this election. There's been nothing about the environment, nothing about freshwater issues, the stuff that probably the older Green Party would focus on. And it's like these big things. And like I say, we've done detailed work on this stuff, and we're really focused on, policy that can be delivered and policy that works. And we know delivery has been a big issue. And I mean, talking about the environment, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment did a report looking at environmental spend from all the different government departments, and I think it was over $1 billion, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I mean it's a big chunk of money. And it was, in all their research, they couldn't really find out that there were any clear outcomes from this spend of money. And I think we've got to make sure that when we're spending money, we're getting the outcomes that we want. And I think that has been a problem for this government to deliver. So yeah, I think we probably have to be a bit careful in just being super aspirational about everything when it can't be delivered, because then people switch off. I mean, there are things that we can do today. There are things that we can deliver. And I think we have to be quite careful about how we pitch ideas. So we're very careful ourselves to say, yeah, one day we'd like a universal basic income. We think with the technology drive, and obviously AI has gone, hell for leather in the last sort of 12 months, that it will come at some point, but we can't deliver it now. And we're quite frank about that, but it's certainly an aspiration. So that's why we're not campaigning on it. So I think, yeah, the Greens need to get back to like, hey, what can we do now? We've still got our water in a terrible state, our lakes in a terrible state. Yeah. They campaign.
I should make it clear. I'm not speaking on behalf of them, obviously.
It was a reasonable comment in terms of the way they're pitching. Yeah. A lot of their policy. Yeah.
You also were just talking about how we spend money and how we spend money wisely. A super chat that's come in from Puma. Thanks for your super chat, Puma. Puma says, what's TOP's perspective on the financial crisis our universities are facing? What's TOP's policy on uni and the science and research funding in New Zealand? So, financial crisis at university and uni and science and research funding. Thanks for your super chat, Puma. Appreciate that. And Raf, what are your thoughts?
I mean, 2 good questions, and they're 2 separate things. So one, the university model doesn't really work anymore. And I think this is we seem to be saying this a lot about a lot of things, and it's been a bums on seats model. The government essentially has forced universities to compete, but they've not allowed universities to set fees. So you can't compete when you've got one arm behind your back. So essentially, universities have done the only thing they can do, which is like just sell as many courses as possible and not worry too much about the quality. Sell stuff that maybe they shouldn't be selling. Compete with each other, which doesn't really help either. So what I would say to Puma is the model needs a review. We don't have a fixed position on what the new model should look like, but I've spoken to a few former, vice chancellors, and they've got very experienced and what sounds sensible views. And essentially, it's probably shrinking what is delivered, maybe having some kind of less competition between universities to sell sort of courses which are actually pretty bog standard courses, a bit more specialization. But I think we need to have a proper independent review of the tertiary sector and the model. So it was appropriate that the government did provide financial support for the universities now, because they're not in a position to, particularly post-COVID, to deal with the structural problems. And, I think, Vic, they're losing a lot of people. And when you lose a lot of this intellectual capital, it doesn't come back. It takes years. And, you're talking about lecturers with, 10, 20, 30 years experience. You can't, that will be gone. It's the same with GPs leaving the medical workforce. That's different. The second thing on the, I think, the research and science here, we want to invest a lot in that sector. We want to invest a lot in, postdoctoral scholarships, in research, that is guided towards commercial outcomes, but also is, so science and research funding. We need to increase our research and development. Now, ACT, I think, want to shut down everything, which is not a good idea.
Everything, literally everything.
Shut down Callaghan, shut down this, because you think, maybe review the management structure and cut down on management salaries and pay the researchers more money, and actually invest in postdocs and provide that pathway from kind of PhD to commercial research. We don't spend enough money on R&D. We have one of our candidates, Dr. Ben Peters. That's the space that he is in. He's down at Dunedin, a biochemist doing research down there. It's really important for New Zealand. If we're going to switch away from dairy farming and from a primary sector focus to a sector that is, more technology focused, more innovative in the primary sector, then we have to invest in it. Yeah, there's our man, Dr. Ben. He can talk about this stuff all day. He's really good at this. And so I'd say to Puma, we really want to boost funding into R&D, but the people doing the work, not management salaries at some of these institutes.
Chewy, you got anything else? I want to question, a specific question I want to get onto with Raf. You want to jump in with anything else at the moment?
I want to take maybe a couple of questions from the chat.
Yep, you go.
If that's cool.
Yeah.
So these are from some of our listeners tonight. I'm going to serve this one up because I have an interest in this as well. Question for Raf. What role do you think our military should serve, and would you support Te Pāti Māori's call for military neutrality?
I probably wouldn't support military neutrality. I think, we have a proud history in our defence force, and that's something that we, shouldn't move on from lightly. I think our focus should be on humanitarian and disaster response. But, we shouldn't, we shouldn't leave ourselves defenseless, essentially. I think it would be somewhat naive to believe that, we're not going to have to pull our weight at some point. The geopolitical situation is shifting all the time. And whilst it might seem nice to go Costa Rica and say, no standing army, we have actually a huge economic zone that we do need to protect. And that means we have to have a functioning Navy, and we have to be able to patrol our waters. And we need. Is that
what military? Sorry to interrupt, but is that what military neutrality means, though? No Navy, or does it just mean being Switzerland?
Yeah, I think it's basically essentially pulling out of all of our relationships which may have any kind of military connection. And no, we wouldn't support that at all. We've got strong.
But you can still have a Navy to monitor our economic zone. And still be military neutral.
You could have a sort of a coast guard without any capability, but I think, we're closely in relationship with Australia. We have a huge marine area to patrol. We don't support military neutrality. Our military role is pretty much what it is now, and we would support that. And it probably needs more investment. But certainly that humanitarian response, peacekeeping response is probably key. Disaster response is key as well. Yeah.
You got another one, Chewy, or shall I go to mine?
Yep. Yeah, let's do another one here. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
There's lots. Right?
There was a really meaty one here. Here we go.
You got it?
Here we go. Out of the two major parties, in your own personal opinion, which one is better for social society and economy?
Well, I mean, they're both the same, really. They're just the other side of the coin. You know, we've had Labour and National, you know, in power for the last, forever, really, but essentially the last 25 years since MMP. And, you know, the country is where it's at. And that's where it's at because of the policies of both of those parties. So, yeah, I don't, you know, I'm not a huge fan of either of them, which is why I'm leading the opportunities.
But are you saying that, for example, the social aspect of politics, that National and Labour are just the same, just as bad as each other? I mean,
the question is social and economy. So you would say traditionally Labour is more focused on the social stuff, National is more focused on the economic stuff. But actually, they both sometimes cross over. I mean, it was Bill English, I think, who raised benefits for the first time in a long time when he was Minister of Finance, and Labour have done some great work around trade deals, which, you know, are always in the background anyway, regardless of which government that comes in. I think the problem is Labour probably haven't done as much on the social stuff that people would have expected, in terms of the Prime Minister who was Minister for Child Poverty, and look at how many people in emergency housing, look how many people still living in cars, and you would have thought that would have been a massive priority for them to deal with.
I think if you look at the last 20, 25 years, I mean, I kind of want to exclude COVID because COVID is still wreaking the world, be they left-wing politics or right-wing politics running the country. It seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Raf, that at the end of a left-wing government, a Labour government, New Zealand seems to be in surplus and doing quite well. And at the end of a right-wing government, since back to Bolger perhaps, at the end of the term, all the coffers are empty and there's more debt. That seems to be what's happening. So when you say National are they're typically focused more on the economy, but I don't know if it would be fair to say they do economy better. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think, well, I mean, yes, I mean, Michael Cullen famously, you know, got government debt down very low. That's not actually a good idea. And I think that's sometimes where we get a sort of counterintuitive bit, is actually if public debt is low, it means you're not investing enough and you're transferring all that debt into the private sector. So I don't particularly worry about public debt. And public debt is relatively low compared
but that's what the right sells their vision on. The right sells their vision on this government spending too much and your grandkids will be paying for their future. The right spends their whole time talking about no debt, no debt, no debt. But when you look at the numbers, that's not how they actually operate the country. But part of my frustration, Raf, with politics is when people say things and they do the opposite. That's one of my, for all politics, that's one of my biggest bed bugs, right?
Yeah, and I think you're probably right. People do talk a load of, you know, BS.
Bullshit.
But if you look
I think the technical word is bullshit, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say that. Yeah. So so after the earthquakes, National borrowed up, and that was the right thing to do. And I think someone posted up something. It was a Russell Norman thing from a previous campaign where he was saying the Greens were going to get public debt down lower and run bigger surpluses. Well, actually, that's not, I don't particularly think that's a good deal. Now, obviously, it depends on economic conditions. And sometimes, you know, New Zealand is a trading economy. We're very subject to, you know, global commodity prices and global interest rates. And actually, a lot of the things that happen here are because they've happened overseas. You know, we sometimes think, oh, weren't we amazing that we did X, Y, and Z? But actually, a lot of this stuff, we're just sort of at the you know, bog end really of what's happening globally. So China does well, the economy is booming, we do well, and we go, oh, haven't we done well because we've had these domestic settings? Well, actually, no, it's just because we've sold, you know, shed loads of stuff to China, and the global economy is booming. So, I mean, in a way, New Zealand, if we take a positive spin on New Zealand, it tends to do okay when the rest of the world is doing okay, and when the rest of the world is not doing okay, it's a sort of a backup place. And that's, I think, what I've observed over the last 20, 30 years. What's different today is that New Zealand is not seen in the same positivity as a backup place. So it feels like, you know, we've lost our mojo a bit. And I mean, I know a lot of people have said that, but you feel it. Talking to people overseas, I don't get a lot of inquiries about New Zealand anymore. No one's talking about New Zealand. It's kind of, maybe that is the COVID hangover. which is still there, and the fact we were very sort of closed off from the rest of the world for a long time. But yeah, I mean, going back to that question, yes, you would expect Labour should be focused on people and workers, and National the party of capital. But it's generally a bit more. It's a bit more mixed up.
And also, certainly Labor's made the error. We've said for a long time, Raf, that when Christopher Luxon came out talking about the CEOs don't like the Labor government, Labor should have gone, yeah, that's cool. We'll stick with the workers. That's actually our history. We'll be with the factory floor. You guys can have the CEOs, but they didn't. Also, just following on from this debt conversation, I sort of agree with you. It's not about the debt. It's about if we can service the debt. It doesn't matter how big our mortgage is on our house. It's if we can afford to pay the mortgage. If you can't afford to pay the debt, if you can't service the debt, that's when you start to get into trouble.
Yes, but also, and I would add to that also what you've spent the money on. That is the question. And I think the issue that Labour have had is that they've spent a lot of money, and everyone's going, well, where's it gone? You know, the mental health or the things like that. So I think they sprayed around a lot of cash, and actually they sprayed a lot around of cash, you know, with wage subsidies and all the stimulus into the economy. And actually the economy didn't really need it. And the biggest error probably Labour have made is not basically taxing that money back. So governments put money in through spending, and they're supposed to use the fiscal lever of tax to bring that money out. And they've left it up to the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank has a single hammer, and they've hammered the economy. It's been a serious error. It's going to cause chaos in our economy over the next 12 to 18 months. It's really starting to bite. Now, what the government should have done, they should have put up income tax rates right off the bat, and drain some of that cash out, because most of that cash was going to households who had balance sheets in pretty good shape. And actually, if you look at the stats, so basically gave away loads of money, and everyone went, oh, that's great. But the economy was turned off. It's not like people suddenly were suffering huge losses. You know, they kept businesses going, which was good. But when it was clear that we were through that, they had no way of draining that cash back out of the system.
I think that's fair as well. I think we've looked at I've looked at the analysis a few times. It also seems with the big debt that they got from going through COVID, what they did was save more businesses and keep more people alive. You know, and I think that's the payoff. And they didn't know exactly what was going to happen, i.e., literally more people alive, as in because of being able to pay people to stay home and stuff rather than go to work and spread more COVID around, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, this is the quote unquote printing money situation. We're paying for it now. The payoff is there are more businesses still operating today, and there are more New Zealanders alive. Where that tipping point is for like too much money for too many lives in business, I don't know, but I think that's where we're at, sort of thing today. Let me ask you this. I'd like to ask a simple question about Chewy, and I and others who watch this are interested in the Julian Bachelor situation at the moment and the meetings that he's having. He's coming to Dunedin on Saturday to have a meeting. I'd like to know this. I'd actually like every leader of every political party to be asked this question. If you were to attend a Julian Bachelor meeting, would you personally be inside listening, outside protesting, or somewhere else?
I would look. I don't really follow this stuff. You know, it's I hear about it, but I'm kind of too busy campaigning and doing our own stuff. And the fringe stuff, I really don't pay a lot of attention to. You know, I understand he's been very divisive, but I switch off from a lot of that. So you wouldn't find me at a meeting like that. You know, stop co-governance or whatever. All these, you know, various fringe things are. I really don't pay a lot of attention to it, and I don't know many people that do, to be honest.
But do you think it is that fringe? I mean, you're talking about ACT getting a lot of votes at the moment. One of the reasons ACT is getting a lot of votes is this rhetoric is getting hold to enough of a sector of society to be for them to think it to be important.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, if we think back to Don Brash and you know, his speech back in whenever it was 04, 05, and how, you know, that really kind of, you know, the iwi Kiwi thing. It's definitely an undercurrent in New Zealand. And I think what has made it worse in recent times, obviously COVID and all the stuff that came out of that. But I think also, you know, Willie Jackson has not done anyone any favors by some of the comments that he's made. And I think it was when he said, I think it was in a Jack Tame interview, he said, Jack, you know, democracy's changed, get used to it, kind of thing. And it's like, what? You can't say things like that. You know, that's a coup, essentially. And I think that people got a little bit scared about that, and a lot of people have raised that with me. And I'm saying, well, actually, democracy hasn't changed. We still have the same parliament and the same processes and the same executive and the same judiciary and so on and so forth. So, but yeah, it's no doubt, it's definitely tapped a sense of fear. And, we've talked a bit about that. We're in a time where fear is kind of the dominant emotion, and there's not enough hope out there. And some of that is because probably the progressive leaders, the Obamas, the Blairs, the Trudeaus, even the Macrons to some extent, have not delivered for a lot of people. And those people are not happy, obviously Trump as well. And that's a time where people can mine that fear. And obviously social media and just the disaggregation of traditional media has meant that people are getting stuff from all over the place, and it's playing to their fears. And I think that's where a lot of that stuff comes from.
I've just seen that you've marked that message there, Chewy. So you can bring it up if you want. Bring that message up, Chewy, because maybe Raf, one of our regular viewers and listeners, is wondering about TOP's rainbow policies. Is that seen as sort of a fringe idea that you're focusing on, on financial stuff and land tax and stuff? What about issues for minorities, including the rainbow community? Where does TOP sit on those sorts of things? Is there anything specific that you have in your policies or your ideologies within TOP to support those sorts of minority communities?
Well, we do have a rainbow policy. It's around somewhere. It has, like you say, it's probably not been a huge focus in terms of our big policies, which have been focused obviously on the teal card, the tax switch, affordable housing, climate. So we probably haven't got as involved in those issues as perhaps some others have been.
So this is probably a good time to segue now back to that conversation. Are you okay for another 10 minutes or so? Are you all right?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah.
10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so when you and I last talked, one of my big concerns, because I'm still thinking about who I'm going to vote for, and I think I said to you pretty honestly, my not voting for TOP at that point, or thinking about not voting for TOP at that point, was nothing to do with your policies, with you as a person, with your ideologies necessarily. It was to do that you'd sort of made a pledge to sit cross benches. And my idea, the two issues I had with that was, one was sitting cross benches technically could allow the perspective of government to get in that I didn't want. But secondly, if it was a hung parliament, it means it could literally be you or you and someone else deciding every single policy that goes through or not. And I have a bit of an issue with that.
Yeah, I do too.
And I wonder, for example, has anything changed in this kind of idea that you had? Because would you give supply and confidence to one side or the other, or are you still determined that no matter what happens, no matter who has the biggest slice of the pie, TOP will be sitting cross benches?
No, we will be sitting cross benches. I mean, that doesn't mean that we won't be giving someone, supply and confidence. I think what's changed since we last talked, and I can't remember exactly when it was. I mean, it looks like when you look at the polling, the average polling, not sort of the individual stuff, that it's still going to be tight, whichever way you look at it. But it looks like it's quite challenging for Labour to form a government. And they haven't released their manifesto. So that's, in a way, this is all going to happen on September the 2nd. So then things may change again. Who knows? They might have some aces to play. We don't know. I wouldn't say all is lost for them, but it's an uphill battle. Winston in the mix, that's another variable. It's very difficult to know how things will turn out. My primary goal is to get into Parliament. I mean, that's why our campaign slogan is a fresh voice. We need a fresh voice in Parliament. The advantage of being in Parliament is that you get to speak to the media every day. We can talk about this stuff. We can talk about the sort of issues we're talking about that nobody really wants to talk about. And we can talk to other parties and we can have open conversations. We can create a more collaborative approach. That is our goal. So in some respects, whoever the next government is going to be is probably not going to be determined by us. It's going to be probably out of our hands. And we don't really want to be in a position where we have to determine the next government anyway, because we want to be there for the long term and we've got to get into Parliament to make that happen.
But I understand that you don't really want to be in that position, but you may be. But what I hear you saying differently this time around is what you would sign a supply and confidence deal, but because you're say you're neither left nor right, does that mean you could supply in confidence to either party, to either side?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
What would you need to see or experience or hear to decide, let's say you were in that position, which one you would give supply and confidence to?
I mean, in terms of what our policy interests are, I mean, obviously for me, winning Ireland, which obviously is my key pitch. I made a Christchurch pitch. I would expect some of those policies to be supported, and then really the teal card is probably the big one. That's the bit where I would say, right, we want to start doing some work on this. We want this up and running. We're not saying it has to have everything on the card from day one, but we want this thing in place. We want that civic service model dialed up. So those are the sort of things that we would ask for.
This is sort of the final line of questioning. And sorry, I don't mean to dominate the conversation here, Chewy, so jump in when you want. But there was many of us, and you know this because I messaged you, that thought there was a very good piece of a very good ethical response from you this week when you made it very clear you didn't want to go on the platform. Many of us thought that was an impressive thing to do, because so much in politics these days we hear people they have a dilemma that they want to separate themselves from the opinions of various media groups, individuals, lobby groups, whatever, whilst still trying to court their vote. We'd be interested to know, and my audience here has a lot to do with reporting on that particular outlet, as to what the reason was. Obviously, you got doorstop. We actually played the call, so people know exactly what we're talking about, as to the rationale and reason behind why you don't want to have anything to do with the platform.
Yeah, well, I had quite a bit of feedback on that, actually. I mean, look, I think I've been on the platform, I know once, maybe twice, but not for a very, very long time. And I know Sean had basically dismissed Top as a bunch of Egypts and no hopers and no chance, whatever. So that's fine. And I don't listen to it. I don't really pay much attention to it. And so last week, I think after the Roy Morgan poll, 4% we got, I had messages from all kinds of people. But we had a big week. We were doing our party list and we were launching our campaign slogan. I had a lot on. And yes, had some messages from the platform. Oh, do you want to come on? No, didn't respond to them. And to be honest, I get messages all the time. I don't pick up the phone. And I don't get back, I didn't get back to you for like 3 or 4 days. I'm kind of busy.
So offended. Offended.
I'm busy kind of, campaigning.
Yeah, of course.
Down here in Ireland. Anyway, so on that Friday, so I was in Wellington. I had a bit of a cold. I'd taken some Codral or whatever the night before, and I was due to get up at 7:30, and I was filming at 8:30 at Parliament, launching our party list and our campaign slogan. And then I got this phone call at 7:20, and it was not on the normal number for the platform. So it was underhand stuff. It was a Wellington number, so I thought, oh god, it's to do with the filming. So I picked it up, and I was a bit groggy, right? So I'd had the antihistamine thing. I was a bit groggy, blah blah blah. And so yes, it would have sounded really bad. But anyway, I think I'm talking. It's like, Sean here from the platform. Yeah, Sean, blah blah blah. Just woke up, and for me, it's actually not even talking to Sean. I don't really care. I mean, it's neither here nor there. But the fact that he played that live without telling me was just really poor ethics. It was really bad, and it breaches broadcasting standards. We know that now. Doesn't have to comply, whatever. I don't care. I'm not going to make a big deal about it. Anyway, I think at the end of the call, I sort of said, look, all right, Sean, I'll have a think about it. Then I got up and I went off to do my filming and all the rest of it. Busy day, busy weekend at Wellington. And then I was getting all this feedback from people going, oh, you don't want to talk to people on the platform, or you don't want our votes or whatever, which obviously none of this, I didn't say any of that. Yes, I don't particularly like Sean, and didn't particularly have any interest in talking to him and all the rest of it. So it's a weird one, because at the same time, I don't want people to feel like I'm not willing to be, debated and do interviews with people. But the platform is not a place that I go on at all, and it's not a place that I engage with, and blah blah blah. But I just thought it was bad ethics. At a very basic level. Now, a lot of people say to me, "Oh, you shouldn't worry about that. Just get on there and do it." It's like, well, it was not cool at all.
So it sounds like what you're saying is primarily because of Sean and how he operates, you didn't want to go on. But if that is the case, what I was going to say today is, should a platform listener see you in this conversation, what would you like to say to his listeners? Because I'm sure you don't have a bone to pick with them. They're
No,
just
not at
citizens
all.
who are going to
Not at
vote.
all. Like I
What
said,
would you say to a platform listener should they see or hear this conversation with you about the upcoming election?
Well, we want to get into Parliament. We think we can play a really important part in the next Parliament. And and you've given me a good grilling, and I'm not bothered about answering questions about stuff. I just think the way that Sean approaches things is lacks basic ethics. It's not about talking to Sean or whatever. I don't particularly, I'm not particularly interested in his style or how he does stuff and all the rest of it. But if he wants to make a public apology for the way that he acted, then sure, I'll go and do an interview with him.
Good luck with that. My mum used to say there'll be 2 moons in the sky and one in the backyard before that will happen, Raf.
Because what he did was poor, and then sort of kind of spread. I'm still getting things. Oh, you didn't want to be interviewed, whatever. Actually, what I said is no, Sean, I don't particularly want to go on the platform. Then I'll have a think about it, blah blah blah. But I'm kind of busy. I'll get back to you next week. And it's like, oh, you're playing this live? That's really poor. I mean, it's just embarrassing.
And it's not the first time he's done that. He has form in doing that.
Yeah. So yeah.
Hey, Raf, I think it's probably time for us to wrap up and let you go, because as always, our hour-long conversation has gone a bit long. If we could keep you for 2 more minutes, because one of our lovely people has given us a super chat with a question for you, so I'd love to be able to put it up for you if that's okay. It's a direct question about policy. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Plan a Walk mostly says, Pat, do you still want to get in touch? Yeah, we will. I'll talk to you later, Plan a Walk. Anyway, but the question is, what is TOP's policy on public transport and other transportation infrastructure? Public transport and transport infrastructure.
Yeah,
that's what Plan a Walk wants to know.
Basically, we need to decarbonize our whole transport system as quickly as possible. So we have made a pitch to electrify our urban bus fleet by 2030. Labour actually does have a policy to do it by 2035. We think, let's get on with it. It's simply about buying the buses and get a cheap deal to just do the whole lot in one go. It can be delivered in 5 years. It is so important because we get 2 wins on this. When we've got issues around the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, but essentially, if we can reduce the amount we have to spend on fossil fuel imports, that has huge impacts on our basic current account deficit, on security of supply. If we can generate our electricity domestically, that's really critical. It also has huge impacts on air quality. And I know particularly here in Christchurch, that is an issue, but even when I've been in Auckland, diesel fumes, air pollution costs huge amounts for the health sector every year. So it's win-win-win. So electrify our transport system as soon as we can. And if that means building more charging infrastructure, we need to do that as well. And more renewable energy, we need more of that as well. So that's our sort of base premise. We do like rails. We would rail. We would like to see more regional, particularly down here in Christchurch. We're hanging out for it down here. More regional rail. It's the best way to shift people around. And we've got to think again 30 years ahead. We've got train tracks all over this country. So the rail corridors are there. That's often the most expensive bit, like buying land, I mean, Auckland, good luck to it. I have no idea what the answer is in Auckland. Probably more buses to start with. But certainly in places like Christchurch and Wellington and those areas, we've got great rail infrastructure. And we just need to put trains on it and start moving people around and building the future generations. Like I was doing a U3A talk the other day, obviously all retired people. And I said, look, I don't expect you to get out of your cars, right? What I want is the younger generations to get used to public transport. I mean, I went to school, in London, on the tube, on the bus. No one thought any different. That's what we need to do here. We need to get kids moving around on public transport. Yeah, so we're very pro public transport. Decarbonisation is absolutely critical. We need to electrify New Zealand as quickly as possible. It will have win-win-win everywhere we look.
Hey, Raf, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I think what we need to do, Chewy, is maybe in the future, I mean, Raf, we probably have you again if you want to come on again. It's just actually me and Chewy shut the fuck up and just get all the 50 questions that come in and just go blah, and just give them to you, because there's so many questions about drug prohibition, about all sorts of other things as well, but we're not holding you any longer because we said an hour and it's been an hour and 20. And
well, I'm going to do a Reddit AMA next week, I think. So maybe.
Oh, they love you on Reddit.
Yeah,
they absolutely love you on Reddit. I said the other day
at all, but I'll go and answer the question.
I said the other day, if Reddit had an electorate seat, you'd be in.
Well, tell us. Make sure you let me know when it is, Raf, and we'll tell people to come and find you to participate in that. All
Oh,
the
God, I'll be there all night. Okay.
lovely people who have asked questions tonight that we haven't got to. We apologise, people. But lots of the questions that people asked, we've also addressed. Most of them was around Karen Plunkett. Lots of questions about that. So you've done that. So we appreciate that, Raf. But look, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck with the election. I don't know what that means for you, and I don't know where it's going to go for you. And good luck for Ireland. And like in 10 words or less, are you polling well in Ireland? Have you done any polls there? Do you know what's going to happen?
Yeah, we're pretty confident. It's my 4th campaign in 10 years. People know me well, and they know that I'm going to do the business for them. So yeah, we're pretty hopeful. All
right. Hey, listen, we'll let you go. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you giving us some time tonight. Good luck. And yeah, stay off the platform. It's not worth it. Well done, sir.
Thanks for listening. See you.
All right. All the best.
Thanks, Raf.
Oh, well, there we go.
Well, that was never going to be an hour, was it? Ever.
No, I'm sorry. I mean, I really did try, but when I saw it getting to like 48, 49, and I was going, like, I wanted to ask a question about BlackRock, and so we still left a whole bunch of things out of there as well. Yeah. All right, we're signing off now, but I thought Chewy would let Raf go, and we'll just have a look. Is there anything in the chat that's more of a comment than a question that we can still put up for all the people who have hung around and checked out Raf's conversation?
Yeah, there's this one. Hit the like and subscribe. It's that one.
What about Emma's? I see Emma's one. Throughout this live stream, I've been on the Metlink bus and train. Very cold out today. Yeah, cool. Very cool.
DIY Guru said New Zealand had less social houses when last national government left office than when they started. Labor have built more social housing than any government in the last 50 years. So I think that was part of a discussion that was happening in the chat around how Kiwi Build is seen as a disappointment or a failure of some sort.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Public transport better than electric cars. Lots of stuff, guys. You've been really awesome tonight. Thank you for participating. Thank you for hanging. We will get this up as a full episode. Well, it's up as a full episode now, but we'll probably do some clips and stuff over the next couple of days as well if you want to share them around, if you enjoyed anything. Actually, you know what? Let's just do this before we go. In the chat, because there's like a 30-second delay, so me and Chewy will dance or something after we ask this question. Is there anyone tonight watching who has gone, maybe top? Like, has the conversation tonight informed you about top that make them an option for you? I'm not saying that you are definitely going to vote for them, but people who maybe weren't thinking about it before, has that conversation tonight given you something to think about, put them into the possibility column? Oh, yep. There's a couple there. There's also some no ways.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking this because obviously we had some questions from the chat that are on very specific issues, and I don't mean to take away from those issues. I tend to think they're pretty important ones as well. But I think that's a problem when you've got a very small party, potentially one seat.
Yeah.
Is that you can't spread yourself real thin.
But obviously the problem with that is
they're really emotive issues. They're important.
But they've only got one seat. But they've only got one seat potentially because if not people vote for them. So that people need to vote for them to give them 2 seats. Because they win one seat, they drag someone through. So, but I get it.
They've got to walk this line, right? And I think it is important. Like, I mean, we hit them with that Julian Batchelor comment, and you know, it wasn't the strongest answer, and sure, I believe him that it doesn't focus on his radar. But for a lot of people, like myself, that's a really important issue. Race relations in New Zealand, how we deal with the treaty, and how we deal with these people that just have such a divergent worldview on what this country should be, that it's going to make me stand out in the dark and shout at them for a bit. I like to be able to compartmentalize something. I feel a burp coming, by the way. I apologize in advance about this. Oh, sheesh, that felt better. God, Lord. I did lean away from the microphone a bit. I think the question that we asked about Julian Batchelor, if we get people to answer it, actually gives us lots of other answers. You know, if you were to attend a Julian Batchelor meeting, the Stop Co-Governance tour, would you go inside and listen? Would you stand outside and protest? And I was thinking before, although I feel more generous
to Raf than I thought beforehand about people answering. Before I asked that question, I thought there's three answers. There's people who would go, I'd sit inside and listen. And for those people, I'd go, roar. There are people who would say, I'd sit outside and protest. And for me personally, I kind of feel, well, that's the right place to be. And there'll be people who go, I don't know, I wouldn't go. And prior to talking to Raf, I was like, to me, that's a little bit playing the game of, I want their vote, but I'm not going to acknowledge it. But as Raf explained that he's not really know much about it, I do feel that I'm going to be more generous and say maybe my option 3 predetermined answer is maybe a bit unfair. But I think still, would they sit inside? Would they sit outside? Maybe what it is, Chewie, if they go, I don't know, I wouldn't go, then that shows that they're either not engaged within that issue or community. And remember, that's not an issue of stop co-governance. That's an issue of race relations. That's actually what it's about. And if they're not engaged in that, do you want them to be your representative? Like, do you want your representative to be thinking about these issues and how to, to better our world and how to be involved with minorities, or do you want them not to? So that maybe if people say, I don't know, I haven't thought about it, maybe that actually does tell a story. I don't know.
Yeah, like I hadn't given, I've given Top a little bit of attention because I think their story, Gareth Morgan spinning up a whole bunch of cash and then just absolutely shitting the bed in the run up to an election, and then them essentially having to rebuild after that. They had some decent momentum that was only really knocked off the rails every time Gareth Morgan decided to go on a talk show.
Yeah.
But they've always had some interesting policies around housing and tax and all of that sort of thing. For the policies that we looked at tonight, I think the teal card's a really good idea.
Yeah.
I like the idea of shifting the narrative. I also really liked his comment, and I hadn't considered this at the time, of the Green Party's going so fucking hard on wealth tax to kind of make room for Labour to come in and go, well, that's pretty extreme.
We kind of talked about that.
We're going to do this.
We kind of talked about that. If these guys talk to each other, because like we've said, the Democrats in America are Labour and the Greens combined, because you have the corporate Democrats in the middle and you have the progressive Democrats on the left, right? And then you have Bernie Sanders as an independent who's like further to the left. But if they were communicating and going, we should approach this, we've talked about this, we should approach this as a block. And as we approach this as a block, you guys go over there with your cuckoo for Cocoa Pops far left stuff. We'll take the middle, and then we'll run the government next year, and we'll find a compromise between the two of us. Because we've said it. We've said if Hipkins hadn't made an absolute statement about ruling those things out, he could have actually said, it's always an option. It's on the table. We'll talk about it. With our partner, and then done a middle ground, making everybody happy. Except for the people who don't want it.
Absolutely.
The majority of voters happy.
Yeah.
All right. I mute my mic when I blow my nose because I sound because I go perp perp when I blow my nose. I blow my nose like my father. All right, team. Been a great show. Thank you very much for being with us. And that's us for the week. We will catch you. No, JK. It's not going to be a 90-minute show. Trust me. It won't be. We refuse. We will catch you Monday night from 9 p.m. for another edition. And look, I've approached the other political parties. We've got a no from Hipkins, but now that we've done one, which is more the kind of style what they would like to do, we'll send it out to the others and say, this is what we want. And if you see a political leader out there, ask them if they were to attend a Julian Batchelor meeting, would they be inside watching, or would they be outside protesting? Or something else.
Winston Peters would be guest speaker.
All right, team. Appreciate you all. Remember, be safe through the weekend. We want to see you all back here on Monday night. And we want to see you bring a friend with you as well. All the best. Take care. And thanks to Raf for coming on as well. Hooroo, team.